What comes to mind when you think of pirates? Huge ships, someone with a parrot on their shoulder, or a sword in one hand and a rum glass in the other. Free spirits riding the wind. Is that what comes to mind? But what if I told you that real pirates were far removed from this romanticized image? In fact, being a pirate was often more like a living nightmare than a glamorous life. It was a life where you had to face hunger, disease, betrayal, and death. Most of the lavish scenes you see in movies are entirely fictional. In real life, pirates were filthy. We're talking about men with rotten teeth, sunburned skin, bodies covered in wounds, and who hadn't bathed in months. There were no buried treasures either. They spent whatever loot they found on drink, gambling, or their next meal without hesitation. They usually ended up with nothing. The most interesting part was this. These people weren't just fighting enemies. They also had to fight their own friends when the time came. On a pirate ship, betrayal is as common as friendship. If you don't follow the rules, you'll either be whipped, thrown overboard, or wake up one morning to find someone trying to kill you. As you can see, piracy is not the story of freedom you see in movies. In reality, this life was a harsh and dark lifestyle that most people couldn't endure for even a day. So, what was the reason these people chose such a life? Were they truly fearless and free spirits, or did they have no other choice? And perhaps most importantly, how did this pirate legend come to be? If you're ready, grab your tea or coffee, sit back, and join me as we dive into the dark, dirty, wild, yet equally fascinating real life of pirates. Who were the pirates really? When we hear the word pirate today, we usually think of a single type, an eye patch, a tricorn hat, a parrot on one shoulder, and a sword in hand. But does real history present us with such a single-type pirate profile? In fact, pirates were a group of people from completely different backgrounds with no connection to each other. Most pirates were actually former sailors. They had worked in the Royal Navy but hadn't been paid, had fallen ill, been mistreated, and hated the system. Some were soldiers who had deserted from wars, at times even those who had escaped slavery, or criminals who couldn't make a living on land, chose to become pirates. Because even though piracy was a crime under the law, for many it was the only way to survive. Imagine working on a ship in the Atlantic in the 1700s, you go months without pay. And not only that, but the captain beats you, the food is terrible, and don't forget the diseases on the ship. When you get ashore, no one wants you, there's no work, and of course, no money. At this point, for some piracy wasn't just a choice, it was a way out. It was a rebellion against the system, the kings, the commanders, and society. However, this sense of freedom shouldn't be overly romanticized, because pirates weren't just anarchists who escaped the rules. Strict laws were enforced on ships. Sometimes, those who made mistakes were punished more harshly than by the Royal Navy. If the spoils were not shared fairly, rebellion; if order was disrupted on the ship, death; if someone drank and neglected their duties, they were thrown overboard. I know you're thinking about this question, and my answer is yes. There were female pirates on ships, but their numbers were very small. Aside from a few legends like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, women had little place on pirate ships. On some ships, it was even forbidden to bring women aboard or even talk about them, because it was believed that such things would bring bad luck. As you can see, pirates weren't just fun-loving, carefree types like in the movies. They represented people who were fed up with life, pushed to the margins of society, and had no other choice but to take a dark path. Perhaps they only wanted freedom, but often the price of that freedom was a life worse than death. Living conditions. Let's go inside the pirate ship now. But I warn you, forget about those clean, shiny ships you see in movies, because real pirate ships were smelly, dark, damp places where it was difficult to even breathe. Let's start with food. If you like, during months-long voyages at sea, fresh food was impossible to come by. There was no meat or vegetables. So, what was the most common food? It was something called ship's biscuit, which was rock-hard, dried biscuits. But those biscuits were often infested with worms. In fact, they were in such a state that pirates would sometimes shake the biscuits to try to get the worms out before biting into them. Meat, yes, there was some, but it was often spoiled because it was salted and stored for months. So, as you can imagine, getting sick from eating was quite possible. Vitamins? Forget it. No fruits or vegetables. That's why the most common disease was scurvy. Due to vitamin C deficiency, teeth fell out, gums bled, and deep wounds opened up. Losing teeth was a common occurrence among pirates. Drinking water at first, there was no problem with that. But after a few weeks, the water in the barrels would turn muddy. That's why pirates usually preferred rum over water. Rum made them more resilient and also got them drunk. But what does drinking rum constantly do? Think: aggression, sleep disorders, mistakes made while drunk. All of these were dangerous enough to be fatal. What about hygiene? The answer is simple: none. No soap, no showers. They would go weeks, even months, without washing. Clothes were never removed or changed. Bodies itched, and lice ran rampant. Skin diseases and infections were almost a daily routine for pirates. Toilet. It's almost a joke, but there was no such thing as a toilet. They would relieve themselves by holding onto the side of the ship. Falling into the sea during a wave was quite normal. That's why pirates had to watch out for each other even during bathroom breaks. Sleep. They slept on hard wooden floors, on wet cloths. Since the ship rocked with every wave, it was impossible to sleep properly. Don't forget that the ship was small and the crew was large. Crowds, noise, and fights continued day and night in a cycle. As you can see, life on a pirate ship was more of a struggle for survival than freedom. Every day, you could go hungry, get sick, fall into the sea, or lose your life in a sudden mutiny. Today, many people might think, I wish I had been a pirate back then. But the truth is, most people couldn't endure those conditions for even a week. Discipline and penalties. From the outside, pirates may seem like symbols of freedom. They did not recognize kings, did not know the law, and lived without rules. But the truth is much more interesting. Pirates had very strict discipline and deadly punishments among themselves. In fact, some pirate ships were governed by rules even stricter than those of the Royal Navy, because a single mistake made hundreds of miles out at sea could lead to the ship sinking, a mutiny breaking out, or everyone dying. That's why pirates established ship laws among themselves, either written or oral, in the interest of their common good. And those who violated these laws paid a very heavy price, as you can imagine. For example, did you drink alcohol while on duty? You would be punished by flogging. Did you disobey the captain's orders? You could be thrown overboard. Did you covet your friend's share, i.e. steal his loot? You would be stabbed or shot. Starting a fight, attacking someone while they were asleep, or leaking information to other ships? Each of these could result in death, loss of limbs, or being thrown overboard. Some pirate ships even had a small council called the Court of Justice. This council would discuss any issues that arose on the ship, reach a decision by majority vote, and impose a punishment. Though it may seem similar to democracy, the decisions were still terrifying. Most of the time, someone would be punished no matter what, because there was no tolerance for disrupting the order, and these punishments had to serve as an example to the crew. One of the most feared punishments was marooning. This punishment involved leaving the guilty pirate alone on a deserted island. He would be given a pistol and a bottle of water, and he would walk away without looking back at the ship. The chances of survival were almost zero. This punishment was even more terrifying than the death penalty, because dying alone was an unbearable idea, even for pirates. Flogging was also a common punishment. Even minor offenses were sometimes punished with 25 to 50 lashes, and these punishments could have fatal consequences on bodies already weakened by disease. On many ships, regular inspections were conducted in the mornings, weapons were checked, and duties were assigned. Anyone who failed to perform their duties, was late, or lied, was under surveillance. As I said, pirates were not free. They had simply escaped the laws of the state and submitted to their own harsher laws. These people, who appeared reckless and carefree from the outside, had actually established a disciplined order out of fear, oppression, and the threat of death to survive. And the strangest part is this: without this system, they couldn't survive a single day at sea. Myths versus facts. Pirates were not, as commonly believed, fun-loving men with parrots on their shoulders, colorful clothes, treasure maps in their hands, and brave warriors searching for gold buried on tropical islands. Almost all of these scenes are Hollywood fabrications. Take, for example, the idea of buried treasure. Do you think there is any buried treasure that has been archaeologically discovered and proven to belong to pirates? No, there isn't. Because pirates didn't bother to hide the loot they found. They spent it, and they did so without wasting any time. Rum, women, gambling, new weapons. Whatever they found, they spent it without hesitation. Did they have the patience to bury gold in the ground or a system they could trust? No, they didn't. So drawing treasure maps and waiting for them, these are all just stories. What about parrots? Yes, some pirates may have carried parrots, especially those who brought exotic animals from South America, but this was not a common practice, except for a few exceptions. Taking care of yourself on a ship was already difficult enough, let alone taking care of a bird. Food was scarce, space was limited, and hygiene was poor. Feeding a parrot may sound romantic, but in real life, it was nothing more than an extra burden. One of the most well-known myths is about pirates' clothing: three-cornered hats, torn but cool clothes, and of course, a pistol and sword on the belt. But as you can see from this video, most of these are images created and iconicized in 20th century novels and films. In reality, it was the opposite. Pirates wore whatever they could find. They often opted for old military uniforms, stolen clothes, or patched shirts, whatever was available. Cleanliness? Forget it. Do you think appearance was their top priority? Of course not. The most important thing was survival. Details like eye patches, hook hands, and wooden legs. These are also mostly exaggerated or completely made-up figures. Of course, there were pirates who were injured in battle, but they didn't make up the majority. There are also modern myths about eye patches, such as, to help one eye adjust to the dark for night vision, but there's no historical evidence for these. In short, most of what you know about piracy is either exaggerated or pure fiction. What remains? A life of misery, pain, and constant fear of death. The end of pirates. All that hardship, illness, hunger, betrayal, and suffering. So, what do you think happened to these pirates in the end? Did they at least find peace, escape, or perhaps a treasure at the end of it all? The answer is simple: no. The truth is that the vast majority of pirates never became rich. In fact, most of them couldn't even save a single gold coin during their lifetime. They didn't retire to an island like in the movies, nor were they remembered as legends. Most of them met their end on the gallows, in beds rotting away from disease, or in the midst of a rebellion. In the early 1700s, piracy spread like an epidemic. The Caribbean and Atlantic coasts were swarming with pirate ships, but this golden age didn't last long. The kingdoms had grown tired of it: England, France, Spain, and others. They all united against the pirates, and do you know what they did? It's not too hard to guess. They offered a bounty for each pirate captured. Money for every pirate caught. The result? Captains were captured one by one. Some were publicly executed in London, others in Jamaica. Some pirates were even left hanging in ports as a warning, so that everyone who entered the ship would see them, be afraid, and learn a lesson. Some pirates tried to give up piracy before they were caught. They tried to go ashore and build a normal life, but they couldn't escape their past. Most were either killed by the local people they were sold to, or fell victim to the revenge of their former enemies. Because, for pirates, there was no safe place, neither at sea nor on land. And perhaps the saddest part is this: the pirates whose names we know today, Blackbeard, Calico Jack, Charles Vane, and others, were few in number. The names of the thousands of other pirates were never recorded in history. They simply vanished. Their ships sank, their bodies were never found, and their stories were forgotten forever. No one knows why they became pirates, how they lived, or how they died. The only thing left behind is silence. Pirates may have been portrayed as legends in books, films, and games for hundreds of years, but the truth goes far beyond those legends. They were dirty, hungry, lonely, and often had no choice but to wait for death. It was not adventure that drove them to this life, but necessity. A man with nowhere else to go sometimes found his last resort in becoming a pirate just to survive. And from that point on, there was no longer any right or wrong, only a life that followed the wind, unaware of where it would be carried. Perhaps we are mistaken, or perhaps pirates were truly free spirits. But that freedom was a path that led not to a map, but often to a gravestone. Now, if the romantic mist of the sea has cleared a little more, and you understand a little better who the real pirates were, when you close this video, you won't remember them the same way you did before. If you liked this video and want to discover the dark truths hidden in the dusty pages of history, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment on the video, and share it with your friends, because sometimes the truth is much more interesting than legends. But if no one tells the story, they will quietly disappear into the dusty pages of history.